Good morning to viewers in America, good afternoon to those of you in Europe, and good evening to anybody in Asia. Welcome to Hot Topics. Our guest today is Curtis Carlson, former president and CEO of Silicon Valley Research Institute, SRI International. In 16 years at the top of the firm, from 1998 to 2014, Curtis oversaw the development of a number of groundbreaking innovations, including Siri, an SRI spin-off company that was bought by Steve Jobs at Apple in 2010. Prior to that, in 1997, he also led the team that developed the HDTV program, which quickly became the standard for television displays worldwide and earned him 2 Technology and Engineering Emmy Awards. Under his watch at SRI, revenue tripled to $550 million per annum, adding tens of billions of dollars of new marketplace value. Today, Curtis runs consultancy firm Practice of Innovation, which works with startups, established companies and government agencies to improve their innovation performance. So Curtis, you were president and CEO of SRI for 16 years and with the company for over 40 years in total, including your time with Sarnoff before they became incorporated into SRI. I hope you'll forgive me for this, but you joined at a time when personal computers were an expensive luxury and the personal technology we all enjoy today was closer to the realms of science fiction than reality. Could you perhaps just give us a flavour of what it was like to exist in the first few years at Sarnoff SRI, particularly compared to when you left in the company in 2014?
Well, you know, when I started my career at RCA, it seemed like there were relatively few big billion-dollar opportunities that you could focus on. And today, obviously, just about every market is wide open. I've never seen more billion-dollar opportunities. In fact, every year it seems like the number of potential ones increase. You know, something like Bitcoin comes along and all of a sudden, wow, you think how many different businesses will be transformed by that. So the big difference is the speed of innovation, the level of global competition, all the new business models that have happened like Uber, and all of these changes create enormous new opportunities. The other side of it, though, is this is now the most competitive time ever in the history of the world as well. The speed of innovation and the number of new entrants around the world mean that if you don't innovate fast enough, you just won't capture these opportunities. And as you may know, the lifetime of the top 500 companies in the world has been declining continuously over the last 100 years. And by some measures today, once you get to be one of the biggest companies in the world, on the average, you've got less than 15 years before you become obsolete and go away. And you don't have to go away, but you have to keep on innovating if you want to be around. 10 or 20 years from now.
And one of the things you are known for is the term Carlsons Law, which is a phrase highlighted in 2011 by New York Times journalist Thomas Friedman, which I will read out for those of you not familiar with it. It reads, "In a world where so many people now have access to education and cheap tools of innovation, innovation that happens from the bottom up tends to be chaotic but smart. Innovation that happens from the top down tends to be orderly but dumb." My question for you, Kurt, is there a way for larger organizations to tap into that chaotic but smart ethos, or is your law sacrosanct?
Well, you know, it was funny. Tom Friedman wrote The World is Flat, that great book that helped people begin to think about the fact that we're in a different time. And we were talking, and I said that kind of matter-of-factly to him. And he loved the idea, so he turned it into an article and actually put it into his next book. And it's partly true. You know, when in a world that moves so fast, where technologies, just about all of the major ones, are beginning to move at rapid exponential rates, you need to be really close to the marketplace, close to the technology, to be able to understand what's going on. And typically that means the people farther down in the organization who are living with it every day. And so the point that I was making with Tom Friedman was that If the sweet spot for management is not moving up, it's moving down, down to the people who are close to the technology, the marketplace, and the competition. So, and I think that's true. And that's one of the things we took advantage of at SRI, and it led to a lot of our successes. Now, can a big company do this? Absolutely. Steve Jobs did this. He collected ideas from the absolute bottom of the organization all the time. He didn't care what rank you had in the organization. If you were an 18-year-old who was the best machine learning expert in the world, he hardly cared where you sat in the organization. So he would pull the ideas up and down more aggressively, I think, than anybody I know. So big companies, of course, can do this, but it requires management rethinking their job and thinking, we really do have to tap into the genius that's inherent in our company. I've never seen a company fail because of the people. It's almost always because management somehow hasn't created the infrastructure and the processes to be able to tap into the genius of their teams. That's the biggest failing, one of the biggest failings that I see.
What's your process for identifying innovation that is truly progressive and worth pursuing? Presumably you have quite a few misses for every hit.
There's no secret. It's, again, sticking to the fundamentals. Even here in Silicon Valley, most venture capitalists lose money, and they don't stick to the fundamentals. So what are some of the fundamentals? Well, the first thing is you have to focus on important opportunities in the white space, if you can. That is, emerging areas where you're not confronted with massive competition. You need to find a beachhead where you can get started without having to be perfect. You need to have a playbook for innovation that teaches your staff the fundamentals. I can give you some examples of that. And you need to have a recurring innovation process where people come together on a regular basis and iterate their value propositions to improve them. Because when you start, wherever you start, it's almost always wrong. I've helped create over 30 new companies in my different roles at SRI, and none of them ended up where we thought when we started. And the reason is because you don't know enough. You don't know enough about the customers, the market. You don't have the best approach. You can't quantify the benefits per cost, and you don't know enough about the competition. So it's a journey. It's about learning. I'll just, as an aside, I'll say, here in Silicon Valley, a lot of people say the goal is to fail fast to succeed early. Fail fast to succeed early. That has to be one of the dumbest ideas I've ever heard. Fail fast. What does that tell you? Who wants to fail fast? Now, we kind of understand what it means, but it doesn't tell you what to do. The goal of innovation is really to learn and create fast. It's about learning and creating faster than the competition to solve and address major market opportunities. And as soon as you say it's about learning and creating, then it tells you what to do. Anything you can do to speed up the learning process is good. Anything you do that slows it down is bad. So if we go back to what Tom Friedman called Carlson's Law, if you put big barriers across the organization that prevents people from tapping into the genius of their colleagues, that slows you down. That slows down learning. And that's not good in today's world.
Okay, and talk us through the process with Siri. Was there a feeling with the company that you had struck gold in a technological and academic sense from day one, or was that something that settled in over time? And forgive me, I have to ask, what was it like to work with Apple, particularly with Steve Jobs?
Well, so Siri is a great example of the basic principle. So the problem we were trying to address, our team, Norman Arsky, Bill Mark, Adam Shire, a great team. The problem they were addressing is that at the time, if you wanted to find applications on the web, you had to click down to find them. In every click, you'd lose about 30% of your potential audience. So if you were 5 or 6 clicks down, basically your application was invisible on the web. So the key insight, the big idea was, let's go directly from speech input to the application you want. And the beachhead market was business travelers. We weren't trying to do everything. We were trying to address the kind of issues that you have when you travel. I need a hotel, I need a train, I need a place to eat, those kinds of problems. So we actually had the technology for several years. What we didn't have was a business model. So we spent several years not spending much money, but incubating various value propositions until we finally could prove that we could get reference fees from the different enterprises that we'd recommend to people to be available. Only when we had a good hypothesis did we hire the team, which we considered to be the best team in the world for that particular application. We incubated the company for another year before we spun it out. As you said, 3 months after we spun it out, Steve Jobs showed up and said he wanted to buy the company. What was interesting is that he didn't send the vice president. Steve Jobs personally came over to our team to put the deal together. And he lived up to his reputation. He was unrelenting. He was convincing. He could be charming. Everything you've ever heard about Steve Jobs was there. And eventually he made an offer, and the team decided that was good enough. We'd sell the company to him. We weren't crazy about that, but the offer was so compelling that the team decided they had to take it. Interestingly enough, that same team went to Apple for a year or so, and now they're back forming a daughter of Siri, or a son of Siri. It's called Viv, to create the next paradigm shift in personal assistance. But yeah, it was a typical Silicon Valley experience.
Now, you've worked with President Obama's National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship, or NACI. Beyond broader funding initiatives and the like, how can governments help to nurture innovation and entrepreneurship? Is that even possible, or is this something you just have to be born with?
Well, no, government sets the foundation for whether it's possible or not. You know, when you think about what innovators do, is they look out at the world and they look for signals, whether they're demographics or technological or customer needs, and they try and put pieces together that can address those opportunities. And it's a tough job because, as you know, the world is noisy. And basically, you're trying to find a very weak signal in a very noisy world. And anything the government can do to reduce the noise is good news. Anything the government does that increases the noise is bad news. So regulations, taxes, political uncertainty, funny trade laws, all those kind of things get in the way. You know, an enlightened government is one that realizes how difficult innovation is and works to make it as easy as possible. The exemplar of this is probably Singapore, who's made more progress in a short time than any other country I know. They have actively put together policies to make innovation and entrepreneurship easier in Singapore. Now, they're very humble about that, and they would tell you, you know, what is our choice? We're a little tiny country. The market's not there, they basically need to be an incredibly competitive and productive place if people are going to come and work there and create the kind of innovations they need for the future. But they understand this. They rank up there as one or two in terms of national competitiveness every year, and it's not by accident. It's because of all the policies the government has put in place.
You're also on the advisory boards for governments of Singapore and Taiwan, and you've spent quite a lot of time working in Japan. What would you say are the main differences in cultural attitudes towards innovation in Asian countries, or is that far too broad a thing to quantify?
Well, Singapore has basically a Chinese culture, and they prove that you can do enormous things. Um, um, the U.S. has tremendous advantages, as you know. One of the biggest advantages we have, which you see here in Silicon Valley, is that we attract some of the absolute best, most entrepreneurial, most passionate, dedicated people from around the world. Without folks from India and China and Taiwan here in Silicon Valley, there would be no Silicon Valley. You know, that's another government policy that helps. You don't have enough of those folks. So Singapore's working to attract those kinds of people. Chile is. A lot of nations are. That's typically the scarcest resource there is in the world. So governments can help do that. Obviously, in a place like Japan, a beautiful country, amazing culture, just the nicest people you could imagine. It's a very tradition-based culture. And the thing about innovation is it has no respect for tradition. None, right? It's all about taking today's traditions and policies and practices and basically ripping them up and starting them over. So in some places that can make things harder, but remember, Japan after World War II led the world in so many areas. They had plenty of entrepreneurs. They had Morita-san, who was the Steve Jobs of the day, who created Sony. You know, a lot of the most famous companies came out of Japan at that period. So the people are there, but you have to nurture them. You have to encourage them. You have to put the right policies in place. It's not for lack of brain power, that's for sure.
There's a question which is going on quite consistently across Europe, is often around which city is going to be the next Silicon Valley, with Berlin, London, Tel Aviv, and more recently Lisbon being touted as potential successes. Do you feel that such comparisons are healthy, or should Europe just focus on what it does best?
Well, every region is different. Every region has its own advantages. You know, Stockholm, again, a very small place, is doing remarkable things in banking and gaming. They've adapted to the fact that the customers are not there, but the web gives them access to the entire world market. A critical mass of innovators have been formed in Stockholm, and they're now incubating more ventures, and they're creating more entrepreneurs, and they've kind of bootstrapped their way up to being very noticeable. Obviously, Israel, there are lots of books written about Israel and what military service and the intelligence service in Israel does to help create entrepreneurial talent. But I think you're right. You have to use your own local resources and leverage them. It's very hard to create something as big and as powerful as Silicon Valley. I formed a number of companies on the East Coast when I worked at our laboratory in Princeton, New Jersey. And one of the big differences about being there, which is a pretty good entrepreneurial place, right? It's certainly on everybody's radar screen. The difference is, in New York, lots of things go on. Obviously, the financial industry, but lots of other businesses go on. Here in Silicon Valley, the only thing we do is basically innovation. And remember I mentioned the fact that it's about finding those weak signals in the noise? Well, here, every time you turn around, you meet someone else who's trying to push the frontier and find those weak signals in the noise. No other place has that concentration of of activity and interest and passion about solving those problems. I unfortunately often think when I meet people from other parts of the world that they're actually several years behind Silicon Valley in terms of understanding the trends and the opportunities that we see in Silicon Valley. And the weather helps because it's always fun to go to a cafe and talk to people here. But just the intensity of the interactions here is unprecedented. So, you know, in a very small way, Stockholm has done that, but and Israel has done that. But that's really one of the things you look for, is just that intensity of interest and finding these opportunities and putting together teams and technologies to address them. I say one more thing about the process of innovation. So as you know, I wrote a book about it. It was a Business Week Top 10 book, and it described what we did at SRI. And it's kind of a microcosm of what we're talking about. When I went to SRI, the company had been in decline for 20 years. It was basically bankrupt. We used up our bank lines. By getting people to work more productively, more collaboratively, focusing on big important problems, by having a playbook for innovation, and by really aggressive ideation. I mean, most people think if I talk to somebody 2 or 3 times a year, that's enough. That's not even close. I mean, if you're not interacting with your colleagues almost every day, certainly in a serious way every week, it's just not, you're not going to learn fast enough to be successful. And as you mentioned in the introduction, we took the same people with the same technologies and the same marketplace, and we tripled the size of SRI and created many tens of billions of dollars of economic value. Most companies have the opportunity to do that, but they need to be serious about having a process for innovation. The book I wrote is about that. I'm writing a new book with a different, that's focused more on the learning and creating part of that equation. But let me give you one very simple, concrete example. One of the most important ideas in the world of business is, what's your value proposition? Now, I've asked thousands of executives for their definition of a value proposition. I've never gotten a consistent answer, not once. What does that mean? It means when people talk to each other in a company, they're basically talking past each other. Does it stop them? No. But it slows them down. So at SRI, everyone knew that for everything we did, we had to answer the questions of a value proposition. What's the important customer and market need? What's our approach for the solution and the business model? What are the benefits per cost or the value of the idea? And why is that 2 to 10 times better than the competition or the alternatives? We call that NABC. It's a very simple idea, but I can't tell you how powerful that is. And that's an example of the kind of things that go into a productive playbook for innovation.
Right, and I think that's a perfect place to leave it. Thank you so much, Curtis, once again for taking the time to speak to us this afternoon, and thank you everybody for watching. Please tune in for more next time.